Oh, Jason, on today's show is going to be hot. We're
ready.
interviewing Jason Feifer, the editor-in-chief of Entrepreneur Magazine.
Wow.
And he's going to share with us why the person who gets rejected the most is usually the one who's the most successful. Like when he wants to book a big-time guest on the Entrepreneur Magazine and book them and interview them, he has to reach out to a ton of people.
I bet.
And he points out, he says usually if he sends out 40 emails requesting somebody to work with him, usually 20 people don't respond at all. Maybe 35 people don't respond at all. But one or two say yes.
And then it's worth it.
Whoever gets rejected the most gets the most success.
Absolutely.
And on today's show, Jason Feifer, the editor-in-chief of Entrepreneur Magazine, breaks it down for us. But not before I can expose the truth about Neil Ferguson, the man who falsely reported that 2.2 million Americans could die from the coronavirus.
Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. One of the reasons that most of the Western world embraced unprecedented mass quarantines this spring was due to the work of a single man, a man you may not have heard of. He's a British academic called Neil Ferguson. Ferguson is a professor at a college in London, but he's also something of an international celebrity. He is best known for his dire predictions about pandemics. Ferguson seemed especially panicked by the Wuhan coronavirus. At one point, he suggested the coronavirus might be comparable to the Spanish flu of 1918, the pandemic that killed up to 100 million people. On February 28th of this year, as the disease spread throughout Europe, Ferguson publicly endorsed the Chinese model of quarantine specifically. Now keep in mind that as Ferguson spoke the words you're about to see, videos were circulating on the internet showing police in Wuhan throwing screaming citizens into the back of panel trucks and driving them to some unspecified internment somewhere. Ferguson must have known that the Chinese government's response in Wuhan was extreme and utterly inhumane. He endorsed it anyway. That's how serious Neil Ferguson was about this virus.
One has to adopt the sort of community measures which have been adopted, particularly in places like Wuhan and China, where you try to reduce contacts between people in the community. So the sorts of measures which are important are, first of all, if anybody has any sort of respiratory disease, cold, anything, stay at home until those symptoms are fully resolved.
Seems like kind of a reserved academic, and all of a sudden he's endorsing the Wuhan response. Leaders around the world paid attention to this. They took Ferguson's advice and locked down their entire populations. The British government asked Ferguson to help design its quarantines as a member of the Scientific Advisory Group for Emergencies, SAGE. Ferguson was happy to help shut down the entire United Kingdom, but it turns out he wasn't that interested at all in participating in it personally. Today, the Telegraph newspaper reported that Neil Ferguson ignored his own lockdowns. While the rest of London stayed trapped indoors, indeed the rest of the country, Ferguson repeatedly invited his married mistress over to his apartment for sex. And then perhaps most striking of all, he was infected with the coronavirus at the time. Neil Ferguson became sick and tested positive in mid-March. We know this because he said so publicly at the time. Not long after that, he invited his mistress over. By doing this, he exposed her to a deadly virus. He also exposed her husband and her children back home.
Some shows don't need a celebrity narrator to introduce the show, but this show does. 2 men, 8 kids, co-created by 2 different women, 13 multi-million-dollar businesses. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Thrive Time Show.
3, 2, 1, here we go!
Started from the bottom, now we here. Started from the bottom, and we'll show you how to get here. Started from the bottom, now we here. We started from the bottom, now we here. We started from the bottom, now we here.
Yes, and yes. Dr. Z, it's always ecstasy when you are next to me. How are you, sir?
I am fantastic. I'm fired up. We've got a big day ahead of us.
Big day ahead of us.
Big day.
We have got the editor-in-chief of Entrepreneur Magazine and the host of 2 podcasts right here on the show with us. Jason, how are you, sir?
What's up, guys? I'm good. How are you?
He's a chief. That's pretty cool. I mean, a chief. Are you
He's
like
a chief.
Are you a Kansas City Chiefs fan?
It
Yeah.
does not come with a cool hat. It sounds like it would, but it doesn't.
Oh, that's too bad.
Well, let's get into this editor-in-chief job you have here at Entrepreneur Magazine. What exactly do you do?
I just walk around with a cool title and people interview me. It's great. No, what do? I mean, the easiest way to say it is that I oversee all editorial. So anything that's edit, anything that's voice, anything that's storytelling, that runs through me in one way or another. And for that matter, I also I sort of serve as like face of brand. So I do a lot of interviews. I go out. I talk to a lot of entrepreneurs. My hope is to just be constantly in touch with and communicating with the world of entrepreneurs and making sure that the brand is reflecting what they're concerned about and what they need.
Did you grow up in a family of entrepreneurs, or are you the first entrepreneur in your lineage?
No, I came. Well, my dad was he's retired now, but he was a dentist. He was a small business person in Margate, Florida at the time. So I had business around me, though I got to be honest, I didn't start in that direction. I started as a community newspaper reporter. Like, to me, my original skill was that I just knew how to go out and talk to people and find stories in their lives and bring it back. And the thing I loved was that journalism was a window into that. Like, you could just go and people will welcome you into their lives and their world just because you're going to write about them. It's amazing. It's like it's the greatest trick in the world. And it was only later that I started to realize that the thing that I really loved was talking to people specifically about how they solved problems, how they pursued passions, how they learned and grew. And the world of entrepreneurs has been the most thrilling world that I've ever been involved in. And I am inspired every day talking to them.
So how did you become the editor-in-chief? Did you wake up one day and then hit your head on the toilet seat and have a vision? Did you know somebody? Did you start off at the bottom? I'd love to hear your story about how you became the editor-in-chief of Entrepreneur Magazine.
Yeah, well, I mean, the actual answer to that question is pretty boring, but I have a good other answer. The actual answer to the question is that I was at a different magazine and I was looking for a change, and there happened to be an executive editor opening at Entrepreneur, and I took it, thinking of it as a great opportunity to shape a brand's magazine. And then the editor-in-chief left 9 months later, and I made a play for the job, right? So that's kind of boring. But here's the real answer. The real answer is, if you rewind all the way back, I started out. I went to Clark University. I graduated in 2002. I had no connections. I wanted to work in magazines, and I had no idea how to do that. And I took this job, tiny newspaper, Gardner News, North Central Massachusetts, covering nothing because there's like nothing going on there, right? I was like writing stories about the local diners all day.
Oh, sweet.
And they were the diners weren't bad, but not what I wanted to write about. And after a year, I made this realization, and this honestly is the answer to your question. I made this realization that I could sit there in this tiny little town in this tiny little paper and write my heart out, and nobody at the kinds of publications that I wanted to work at, these big national publications, nobody was reading my stuff, and nobody was ever going to call me and say, "Come work for us." I had to go to them.
Oh,
exactly.
Oh, so you had to go to
man.
them.
No, you have to go to them. Every time that I tell that story, I want that music now popping in the background. You have to go to them. And so I quit, and I sat in my bedroom for 9 months, this tiny little bedroom in central Massachusetts next to a graveyard, and where I was paying a couple $100 a month in rent. And I just started cold pitching stories, tracking down editors, convincing them to let me write for them. And I was proving to them and to the world that I could work at a higher level. And honestly, that is what propelled my career. It was by not sitting around waiting for someone to come to me. It was me going to them. And that is the thing that entrepreneurs have to do every day, is get up and figure out how to go make your case. You can't just sit around and wait.
Did you pick up the phone and call people that you did not know?
Well, I emailed them, and then I tried to convince them to get on the phone with me. But yeah, I emailed them, and I got ignored over and over and over again. And I remember the first person who ever got on the phone with me, who I didn't know, was this editor at the Washington Post. I was going to write for their health section. I pitched a story, and she wanted to talk through the story. I was this kid. I had basically no experience that would prove that I was able to do this. Writing for the Post, and I couldn't have been more nervous. I was pacing around this little apartment. My heart was beating. My mouth was dry. And at the end of like 30 minutes of making my case, she basically said, I'm not ready to say yes, but I'm not ready to say no. So if you want to go and prove to me that you can do this story, then go for it, and let's see what happens. And so I went and I reported the crap out of this thing. I sent her 4,000 words for a story that wasn't going to run at nearly that length. And she read it all, and she said, "Okay, you convinced me." And that's what you got to do.
How many no's did you have to get? How many rejections did you have to get before you got that gig?
Oh, I mean, the funny thing is that you don't get the no's, you get the nothings. The no's are great. The no means that that somebody paid attention and maybe will even engage with you. What you mostly get is nothing.
Ghosting's the worst.
Silent.
Yeah, ghosting's the worst, isn't it?
How many nothings did you get? How many nothings? How many just nothing? You sent out an email and just nothing.
Oh, I mean, in the beginning, it would probably be 20 nothings to every no and 40 nothings to every yes. I mean, and these were all, and every one of those things was like a new idea that I had, that I tracked down, that I did some work on, that went absolutely nowhere. And then, the hit rate starts to improve as you go along. But at the beginning, you just have to continue to believe that you have value and that you can learn, and that you just have to prove it to these people, because and you have to think, what, these people aren't like, they're not being jerks. Although frankly, if you're completely ignoring people, I kind of think that you are a jerk. Like I try to learn from that lesson and not ignore people, but you're up against a lot of people. You are always, doesn't matter what you're doing, you're always up against a ton of people, and you just have to be better than them. And that means you have to start figuring out what is the thing that you could be doing that others are not doing. And I got to tell you, the answer in every single industry that I've ever explored and the ones that I've worked in, the answers are oftentimes pretty simple things, right? I mean, like we talk in entrepreneurship about how like trust can be a competitive advantage. Just building trust, the simplest thing in the world, but a lot of people just forget to do it. In like in that early days of journalism, it was like filing on time and being easy to edit and being really fast and responsive. Like once you get somebody's ear and you prove to them that you will hustle like hell, oh my God, they'll come back to you every time.
You are a laser show of just knowledge bombs. Now Z, you and Josh Wilson, you guys are gonna take the show to another level now. So
thank you.
Prepare yourself, Jason, for Dr. Zellner to interrogate you with questions that you're not prepared for. And they're really lose-lose situations. So you're going to lose as a question ask, because you're going to ask the tough question. You're going to put him on the spot, and then he won't have the answer. It's going to get awkward. So Z, take us down to the bottom.
I'm so excited for this.
Yeah. So okay. So now you're a chief. I don't know. I've never addressed a chief before. I'm really intimidated, by the way. So what?
I like to see people share.
Okay. Top 10. Some of your favorite articles you've written. Give us a couple, 3 examples of some really fun articles you've written, businesses you've kind of looked into, some really good stories. You have a couple hot stories, a couple top 10s.
Yeah. Okay, great. So the biggest problem with answering this question is that I'm probably going to go on too long. So just cut me off with things like All right. So the things that I love, I've interviewed a lot of famous people. I mean, right now, the current cover of the magazine has Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson and his business partner, Danny Garcia, on it. And I did that story. And I love talking to them. And the thing that they said the most that stuck with me was, or the thing they said to me that stuck with me the most was, we are not attached to process. We're only attached to outcome. Like they're willing to constantly throw out how they're doing things, constantly reinvent. I love that. I love talking to very, very accomplished people. But I got to tell you, some of the stories that stay with me the most are the ones of small businesses, entrepreneurs who, are maybe unknown, but who did something so clever and so smart and so telling that any entrepreneur anywhere could just slap themselves on the head and say, oh my God, that's amazing. So let me just give you a quick one. Do you guys know the beer Dogfish? Dogfish Brewing out of Delaware?
Dogfish.
I
don't know about it, but that's just because I'm a bad person.
All right, yeah, that sounds right.
Okay.
Well, if you were a good person, you would know because it's good beer. So there's this very innovative brewery, and it's run by a guy named Sam. And a couple of years ago, I was walking around the brewery with Sam, and he tells me this story, which I immediately put in the magazine because I loved it. All right, so they put out fairly early on. They put out a beer called 60 Minute IPA. It's 6% alcohol by volume beer. That's where 60 Minute comes from. It's a great beer. People loved that beer. They wanted so much of that beer, and this beer quickly rocketed up to be consuming about like 70 to 80% of all sales of Dogfish, right? So you got a hit beer. And what do people think when you got a hit? What do you want to do? You want to maximize it, right? You want to sell that beer. And that would be the natural thing to do. That is not what Sam did. Sam was concerned about that. And here's why he was concerned. Because he knows that tastes change, that beer tastes change. And if he lets this IPA be a runaway success so that every bar and every restaurant and everywhere you go, the only time you ever see Dogfish is when you see an IPA, well, then people are going to associate Dogfish with IPA. And then the minute that tastes change, what is going to happen to his company? It's going to be old and outdated. And so he did this thing that I love that was so crazy, which is that he capped sales of his best-selling product at 50% of all sales of the beer. So it was going to take off to like 70, 80%. He capped it at 50%, which meant that he had lots of bars and restaurants and even Amtrak calling him and saying, we want this beer. And he would say no. And they would be angry at him, screaming at him, screaming on the street at him. I mean, and I've walked around with Sam. He's like a celebrity in Delaware. People were screaming on the street at him. And you know what? He stuck with it. And the reason he did that was because he knew that that would give him an opportunity opportunity to say, you know what, we don't have this beer right now. I'm sorry, we make it fresh, but we have all these other kinds of beers. You should try these other kinds of beers. And that way, years later, many years later, Dogfish is not known as an IPA brand. It's known as an innovative brand. And last year, it sold for $300 million. And it would not have done that if he had just made it like a run on IPAs for as long as he could. And that's what I love. It's a thing I love about entrepreneurs is that the best entrepreneurs, they will think the long game, even when it hurts.
Interesting. That's
Think
a fun,
long
that's
game,
a fun story.
even when it hurts. That knowledge
That's a
bomb.
knowledge bomb.
I'm going to give you a mega point.
Give
for
him a mega
that.
point,
That's
yeah.
I don't just give those to people.
I know. You got to work hard to get those. Another great story because that was fun.
Yeah, sure. I got
right.
them all day. How long you got?
Here we go.
So,
90 seconds. 90 seconds. We have a 90-second hot story.
okay, great. A woman named Joelle creates a butter dish that can flip up and down. It's whatever. It's cool. It's a great butter dish. It's called Buttery, and she wants to do some market research. How much is it gonna? How much should she charge? What kind of color should she put? And she reaches a company and she says, "How much will you charge to do this market research for me?" And they say $10,000. She does not have $10,000. So what does she do? Well, she realizes, so smart, that she can go to an airport whenever she wants. Just buy a cheap ticket, the cheapest ticket you can find, one way. You never have to get on the flight. Why? Because you walk into the airport and what do you have? You have nothing but a building, well, in normal times, not coronavirus times, but you have a building full of people who have nothing better to do than sit around and answer questions about butter dishes. So that's what she does. She starts going from gate 1 to 2 to 3. By the time she gets to gate 8, gate 1, full of new people. You can do that all day. She did that, and that is how she did her market research, saved $10,000, got that thing into the market. Buttery, it's a great butter dish. There you go.
Bam.
Do I get another boom on that?
I'll give you a boom, and I'll give you a mega point, and a holy cow.
Oh my! That's a trifecta. That's a trifecta right there.
And a little Drake sizzle. Little Drake sizzle. Now, sir, where can people learn more about you? Tell us about your 2 podcasts. I guess what are what's the best way to find the 2 podcasts that you record?
Well, I would say any podcast platform. If you listen to podcasts and you know where to go, just go. Here are the 2. I'd love you to check them out. Number 1 is called Problem Solvers. Problem Solvers, that is, as you can believe, a show about entrepreneurs solving problems in their business. And then the other one is called Pessimist's Archive. Pessimist's Archive is a history show about why people resist new things. Something that I think every entrepreneur should understand is why people are afraid of change. Each episode, we look at the moment that something new was introduced, like cars, bicycles, teddy bears, novels, everything that we take for granted today. We try to understand why it freaked everyone out. And the most recent episode was coronavirus related, a little bit different. It looks at all the good that is going to come out of all this terrible, because lots of good is going to come. So Pessimist Archive, Problem Solvers, go to any podcast platform, check them out.
Jason, I appreciate you very much for being here, my friend. You are a great American, and do you have if you had to recommend one magazine for all the entrepreneurs out there, what would be that magazine? What would be the one you'd recommend?
That's good. Well, I really like 17 magazine. What do you guys think?
Oh, no.
I appreciate that. Entrepreneur is, I would say, a fantastic magazine, and I would read it even if I wasn't making it. We try to make this thing not about individual companies. We make it about you. We want you to be able to calibrate your way of thinking to really smart problem-solving strategies. And so everything in that magazine, my hope is that it's real, it's honest, it's about things that go wrong and then ways to make them right. So please check it out.
Jason, you sound like a beautiful man.
Oh, he does.
And I appreciate you for joining us.
I appreciate that. I like shower today.
All right, man. You take care and have a great rest of your day.
Hey, thanks. You too, guys.
Appreciate it.
Bye.
And now, without any further ado, 3, 2, 1, boom!
If you don't understand you're the one, you won't understand why you're being attacked like you're being attacked. Whenever the enemy knows that the one is coming, he always sets traps to stop them from succeeding because they're the one. And to him whom much is given, much is required. And so the text starts out talking about Abraham because Abraham is the one. And Abraham had to move out from his country and away from his kindred because he was the one. So he was a misfit because he was the one. So he didn't get to stay because he was the one. So he had to live in isolation because he was the one. So he probably was lonely because he was the one. Because he was the one. Because he was the one.
New city, new state, it's gonna be a mean race. All the sins that I have done, I'm grateful for a clean slate. Felt like I was different, I ain't never tried to prove it though. Stack your chips, get on your grind, don't never make excuses, bro. Solid as a rock, loyalty is all I ever know. Doing what you've always done, then homie, you can never grow. Conversations with the Lord, I ask him would I ever blow. Told me I got dead weight, so friends, I gotta let them go. We don't make it. I know that they hating, it's all on their faces. We destined for greatness. I said, I've been patient. I know it's my moment, no stopping, we going, this thing is in motion. What you gon' do when your back's against the wall? You gon' stand up like a champ or you gon' curl up in the ball? I'm the one, I've been chosen, so I'm riding through it all. Gotta keep your faith up so you can rise and never fall. Let's go.
And Abraham had to move out from his country and away from his kindred because he was the one. So he didn't get to stay with his kinfolks because he was the one. They are always on the hit list because hell knows that he is the one. I want to talk to some people that have been up under crazy attack. And to him whom much is given, much is required.
The devil's been attacking, I ain't stressing from it. Cause every time that happens, there's a blessing coming. Obsessing over problems that you can't change. I had you going crazy, learn your lesson from it. Remember when they cut my water off, homie? Man, reflecting how they cut my lights off too. Dog, I had to move back in with my mama. Had me feeling like a failure, that's what life would do. Gotta get up on your grind, I had to make the right move. Ramen noodles every night, I had some beans and rice too. Execution is the key, don't tell me what you might do. Favor from the man above, no other God is like you. You can knock me down, but I promise I ain't staying there. Feeling like I am the one, we just begun, let's make it clear. Me and Clay clicking up, y'all don't even get it, bruh. About to be colossal, taking over when we rip it up, hey.
And Abraham had to move out from his country and away from his kindred because he was the one. So he didn't get to stay with his kinfolks because he was the one. They are always on the hit list because hell knows that he is the one. I want to talk to some people that have been up under crazy attack. And to him whom much is given, much is required.
Yeah, started from the bottom, now I'm here. Overnight success after 23 years. Got the dragon energy, got another gear. Got a superpower, man, I call persevere. Cause I never have it thought people call fear. I never stop writing when the future's not clear. We're gonna be dead soon and I'm just being real. So I'll be paralyzed by the thoughts that we feel.
So you'll stop begging for people to come into agreement with you. So you'll stop doing polls and census and trying to get everybody to come into consensus with your vision so that you won't need nobody to say amen when you preach because you already know that you got heaven saying amen. The power of one.
Listen to the entire T.D. Jakes sermon, Grasping the Moment, by visiting T.D. Jakes' YouTube channel, simply named T.D. Jakes.